Man, I'm starving. I definitely should not have skipped out on lunch today. Maybe I can make a run to the grocery store and find some food. How simple it is for us today to go to a restaurant or grocery store and find our next meal. When humans were hunter-gatherers, however, they didn't have that opportunity. They hunted for meat and gathered whatever edible plant material they could find. As nomadic groups spread further into new lands, though, something changed. Villages began dotting the landscape, trade routes opened up between indigenous tribes, and people settled down from their traveling ways. You may ask, why the drastic change in lifestyle? The answer lies in agriculture. Agriculture impacts us all at least 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We all rely on agriculture to provide the food that we eat, but where did that food come from? Earlier this school year, I learned about the Columbian Exchange in my history class. Through my assignments, I learned where crops originated and how people, particularly Native Americans, used them as food and other materials. Since the time people realized that certain plants are edible, various processes have gone into creating the fruits and vegetables we enjoy today. In this speech, I would like to discuss with you where some of those crops originated, how early groups cared for them, and the various ways people have used them throughout the years. I'll begin by discussing where those crops were first developed and domesticated. For generations, humankind has sown plant seeds across the globe. According to Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian agricultural scientist, roughly 640 crop species are associated with the 8 biodiversity centers across the globe, with roughly 1/6 of those crops originating in the New World. Based on research conducted by the University of Arkansas, the original mutations that led to an edible corn first occurred in Mexico roughly 9,000 years ago, when human selection changed a grass into a crop. Tomatoes and squash also have origins tied to Mexico, being cultivated as early as 500 BC. Another crop, the bean, was first cultivated in South America. A staple of indigenous diets, it had its start roughly 8,000 years ago in Peru. Also from South America, tobacco became a popular crop due to its addictive properties. North Carolina State University says that Native American tribes in the eastern U.S. grew Nicotiana rustica, which was the first commercialized form of tobacco. Now that we know where some of those crops originated, let's look at the ways that early groups cared for them. Just as we know today that plants need certain requirements to germinate and produce usable parts, so did early Native American groups. Farm owner Carleen Madigan, managing editor of Horticulture Magazine and the Backyard Homestead, provides the example that warm season crops, like tomatoes, snap beans, and squash, evolved in the semi-tropical regions of the world, where cool nights alternate with warm days for the majority of the year. Just as Native Americans grew those crops in those same environments, they are still the optimal place to grow them today. Some crops can even be planted together to increase their chances of survival. Known as the Three Sisters, beans, corn, and squash have symbiotic relationships between each other. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, beans fix nitrogen in the soil, while corn stalks serve as bean poles. Growing low to the ground, squash leaves inhibit weed growth and retain soil moisture. The relationship between these crops is known as intercropping. Indigenous people also had complex irrigation systems, unique tools, and interesting planting and harvesting methods. Southwestern tribes such as the Pueblo created ruts and canals in the ground to supply their fields with water. Indicated by Kenyon College, Native American tribes in Ohio soaked corn kernels in water before planting them in mounds, as shown here. The unique characteristics of indigenous agriculture led to interesting ways for them to be used. Let's now explore the various ways people have used them throughout the years. Crops raised by Native Americans were not just used as food, they held prevalence in many other materials and products. Based on an article from Glacier National Park, the uses of plants by Native Americans was passed down generation to generation. For example, when tobacco was first introduced to European colonists, it quickly gained popularity as a cash crop, being used in products like cigars, snuff, and cigarettes. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, people have taken to drying beans. This stores the protein-rich nutrients of the plant without expending any energy to process or store them. Corn also has a diverse list of uses, being used today in livestock feeds, biofuels, and cosmetics. As we continue to find uses for traditional crop species, it's certainly interesting to look back on the rich history of their cultivation. In summary, we have looked at where traditional Native American crops were first domesticated and developed, how people cared for them throughout the years, and the various ways that they've been used. So the next time you're at the grocery store, think about the fruits and vegetables in your shopping cart. As proven by corn, squash, and beans, they have gone through generations of care and development to end up on your grocery store aisles. Now, time for me to find out what I want to eat.